The crystal flute of champagne trembled slightly in Celeste Marlowe's grasp, its golden bubbles rising like whispers of something unspeakable. Tonight marked 10 years of marriage, an anniversary meant for candlelight promises and quiet reverence. Instead, the air at Aria shimmered with something colder. Across the table, Julian Ashford looked every inch the polished executive, his charm carved in candlelight, his smile just a shade too tight. To his right sat Vivian Dane, radiant, audacious, and entirely out of place, a guest at their private celebration, a threat hiding in plain sight. 6 months pregnant, Celeste felt the baby stir, and with it, a silent warning. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and the performance was about to shatter. Before we begin, take a moment and comment your city below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now, let's dive in. The lie tasted of vintage Dom Perignon and seared scallops. "To 10 years," Julian said, raising his glass. His voice, usually a warm baritone that could soothe frantic investors and charm stubborn clients, had a brittle edge. "And to the future." Celeste met his gaze over the rim of her glass, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "To the future," she echoed, her eyes flicking involuntarily to Vivian. Vivian Dane was everything Celeste wasn't, at least on the surface. She was sharp angles and bold colors, her crimson dress a slash of defiance in the restaurant's muted elegance. Her laughter was loud, her ambition unconcealed. She'd been at Innovatech Solutions for 2 years, a rising star Julian had personally mentored. Celeste, the company's founder and silent majority owner, had approved her hiring, seeing a reflection of her own younger, hungrier self in Vivian's resume. Now, she just saw a predator. "I can't thank you both enough for having me," Vivian said, her voice dripping with a practiced sincerity. "It's an honor to celebrate with you. 10 years is incredible. Truly." "We believe in celebrating milestones," Julian said, his hand finding Celeste's on the table. It was a gesture for the audience of one. His touch was cold, a proprietary claim rather than an intimate connection. The large diamond on Celeste's finger, a gift from their 5th anniversary, felt like a miniature shackle. Celeste withdrew her hand under the pretense of adjusting her napkin on her lap. The baby kicked, a sudden insistent thump against her ribs. "I know," she thought, a silent message to her unborn child. "I feel it too." She had founded Innovatech with the inheritance from her parents, a brilliant software engineer with a vision for AI-driven logistics that was years ahead of its time. But she was an architect, not a salesman. She loved the clean, logical world of code, not the messy, ego-driven world of boardrooms. Julian, with his MBA and charismatic charm, had been the perfect partner in life, and, she thought, in business. She'd made him CEO, trusting him to build the empire while she retained ownership, the quiet power behind the throne. It was a partnership that, from the outside, looked perfect. He was the face. She was the foundation. But foundations can tremble. "Actually," Julian said, clearing his throat and shifting in his seat. He cast a look at Vivian, a shared secret glance that struck Celeste with the force of a physical blow. "There's another reason I wanted Vivian here tonight. Another milestone to celebrate." The air in their private alcove grew thick, heavy with unspoken words. The distant murmur of the restaurant faded into a dull roar in Celeste's ears. She watched, as if in slow motion, as Julian's hand left the table and found Vivian's. Their fingers intertwined. A perfect, damning fit. "Julian, what are you doing?" Celeste's voice was a whisper, a thread of sound in the sudden, deafening silence. Vivian's expression shifted from feigned deference to triumphant pride. A slow, radiant smile spread across her face. "Julian?" she prompted, her voice soft but firm. He turned his gaze back to Celeste. The charm was gone, replaced by a cool, almost clinical resolve. Celeste, this has been difficult for a long time. We've been living separate lives under the same roof. You've been so consumed by your projects and now the baby. We've grown apart. It was a classic cowardly script, and he delivered it with chilling precision. Every word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall between them right there at the table. Grown apart? Celeste felt a hysterical laugh bubble in her chest, but she choked it down. Julian, I'm carrying your child. We had breakfast together this morning. You kissed me goodbye. A formality, he said, waving a dismissive hand. We both know the intimacy has been gone for years. It was a lie so audacious, so cruel, that it stole her breath. He was rewriting their history in real time, erasing every moment of tenderness, every shared laugh, every whispered dream. He was invalidating her, them everything. Vivian chose that moment to deliver the killing blow. She held up her left hand, which had been resting in her lap. A new, ostentatious diamond ring glittered on her fourth finger, a garish twin to the one Celeste wore. Julian and I are getting married, Vivian announced, her voice ringing with victory. She looked directly at Celeste, her eyes shining with a venomous pity. He asked me last week. I wanted to wait for the right time to tell you, but Julian insisted. He believes in honesty. Honesty. The word was a profanity. The world tilted. The champagne flute slipped from Celeste's nerveless fingers, hitting the plush carpet with a dull thud, its contents bleeding into the fibers like a wound. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange, glacial calm settled over her. Her mind, the same mind that could architect complex algorithms and see patterns in chaotic data, was processing the variables of this new, horrific equation. The betrayal was one thing. The public humiliation was another. But the strategic calculation behind it, that was the most terrifying part. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a coup. He was CEO. He ran the company. He had the board's loyalty, the investors' trust. In his mind, he was Innovatech. She, the pregnant, reclusive owner, was just a legacy obstacle, and Vivian was his queen, the ambitious partner who would help him secure his kingdom. Celeste looked from Julian's resolute face to Vivian's smug one. They thought they had won. They saw a heartbroken, hormonal, pregnant wife about to be cast aside. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had forgotten one crucial detail, the bedrock on which their entire world was built. He might be the CEO, but she was the owner. She had been the silent foundation for a decade, but foundations don't just support. They can also break. Slowly, deliberately, Celeste placed her hands on her swollen belly. A surge of protective fury, colder and harder than any grief, solidified in her core. It wasn't just her company anymore. It wasn't just her life. It was her child's legacy. She rose from the table, her movement steady, her spine straight. The performance was over, and a new one was about to begin. "Excuse me," she said, her voice impossibly even. "I believe this conversation is over." She turned and walked away, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of a 10-year lie. The gaudy diamond on Vivian's hand, glittering like a shard of broken glass. She didn't look back. The drive home from Aria was 22 minutes of suffocating silence. Julian drove the Mercedes, his knuckles white on the leather steering wheel. He had expected tears, hysterics, a scene. He had prepared for a storm. Celeste's cold, surgical calm was something for which he had no defense. She sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blurred city lights, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. She hadn't said a word since leaving the restaurant. Their home, a sprawling minimalist masterpiece in the Hollywood Hills that had once been featured in an architectural magazine, felt cavernous and hostile when they entered. The floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a glittering panorama of Los Angeles, a city of dreams that now felt like a city of ghosts. Julian finally broke the silence as he tossed his keys onto a marble console table. "Celeste, we need to talk about this like adults." Celeste turned slowly to face him. The ambient light from the city below cast long shadows across her face, making her familiar features seem alien. "Do adults announce their new engagement at their wife's anniversary dinner?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Is that in the manual?" "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he began, falling back on the coward's first line of defense. Vivian got excited. The moment felt right. "The moment felt right?" Celeste laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor. "The moment you chose to detonate a bomb in my life felt right? No, Julian, this was a power play. This was calculated." "You're being hysterical," he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "Your hormones are all over the place. We can discuss the terms of the separation when you're calmer. I'll be generous, of course. For you and the baby." The terms. He was already talking about terms. As if their marriage was a hostile takeover to be negotiated. And his mention of her hormones was the final, clarifying insult. He saw her pregnancy not as the future they had planned, but as a weakness he could exploit. "Generous?" she repeated, stepping closer. For the first time that night, he saw the fire return to her eyes, and he took an involuntary step back. "You're going to be generous with my money? With the company I built? The home I paid for?" "Our company, Celeste," he corrected, his jaw tightening. "I made it what it is. I put in the work, the sweat. I built the relationships. You've been hiding behind your computer for years. The board, the staff. They see me as Innovatech." "Then they're about to get a rude awakening," she said. She turned and walked towards the master suite. Julian, assuming she was retreating, followed. "I'll sleep in the guest wing tonight," he said, a peace offering that cost him nothing. "We can have our lawyers talk next week. Keep it clean. For the company." Celeste paused at the bedroom door. "You won't be sleeping here at all, Julian." She walked into the room, and he watched, confused, as she went directly to the integrated wall panel. Her fingers flew across the screen, typing in a code he'd never seen before. A series of soft clicks echoed through the house. "What are you doing?" he asked, a flicker of unease in his voice. "I founded this company on creating secure, intelligent systems, remember?" she said without looking at him. "Our home is the beta test for Innovatech's new smart security suite. Facial recognition, voice print analysis, tiered access protocols. Very sophisticated." She turned to him, a chillingly serene smile on her face. "Your access to the house, the gates, the garage, the digital accounts linked to this address has just been revoked. The system will update globally in 5 minutes." Julian stared at her, dumbfounded. "You can't be serious. You're kicking me out?" "I'm securing my assets," she corrected him. "You have 4 minutes to collect your personal effects. I suggest you start with the contents of your pockets. After that, you'll be trespassing." His face, a mask of arrogant composure just moments before, began to crumble. This wasn't the script. "Celeste, this is insane. You can't do this." "Watch me," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You and Vivian made a critical miscalculation. You assumed my silence was weakness. You assumed my trust was ignorance. You staged a public ambush to humiliate me, to fracture my confidence, to make me fold. You wanted to make me the distraught, abandoned wife so you could sweep in and take control of the company out of necessity." She took another step closer, her gaze unwavering. "You wanted a war, Julian. You just misidentified your enemy. You thought you were fighting your wife. You're not. You're fighting the founder and majority shareholder of Innovatech Solutions, and she has just been activated." The reality of his situation began to dawn on him. The house, the cars, the accounts, they were all tied to her, a fact he'd conveniently ignored while playing the role of king. "You have 2 minutes, she said, glancing at her watch. Panic finally broke through his facade. He scrambled, grabbing a watch from the dresser, his wallet, fumbling for his car keys, realizing with a jolt they were the ones he'd tossed on the console. A soft chime echoed through the house. "System locked," said a calm, automated female voice from the wall panel. Julian's face went pale. He ran out of the bedroom and tried the front door. It was immovable. "Celeste, open the door!" he yelled, his voice laced with desperation. Celeste walked calmly out of the bedroom and stood at the top of the short flight of stairs leading down to the foyer. She looked down at the man who was now, effectively, a prisoner in the gilded cage he had helped build. "Goodbye, Julian," she said. She pressed another button on her phone. The service entrance at the side of the house clicked open. "The service door is unlocked. I believe it's a fitting exit for you." He stared at her, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief. He had walked in tonight expecting to be the victor, the master of his new destiny. Now he was being dismissed like a disgraced employee. He stalked towards the service door, turning back one last time. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "No, Julian," Celeste said, her hand resting on her child. "You will." She watched him disappear into the night, then locked the final door. The silence that filled the house was no longer suffocating. It was absolute. It was hers. Alone in the vast, empty space, the adrenaline began to fade, and a single hot tear finally traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of rage. The war had just begun. Her first call wasn't to her mother or a friend. It was to Beatrice Hale, her father's old law partner and the sharpest corporate attorney in California. "Beatrice," she said when the older woman answered, "it's Celeste. We have a problem. Activate the Marlowe Protocol." The Marlowe Protocol was not a legal document. It was a state of mind. It was a term Celeste and Beatrice had coined years ago, a hypothetical contingency plan for a catastrophic corporate threat. They had never imagined the threat would be sleeping in Celeste's bed. Beatrice, a woman whose demeanor was as sharp as her tailored suits, didn't waste time with condolences. "Details, now," she commanded over the phone. Celeste recounted the evening with the detached precision of an engineer describing a system failure. The dinner, Vivian's ring, Julian's speech. Her own countermove with the house security. "Good," Beatrice said, a rare note of approval in her voice. "Locking him out was the correct opening move. It establishes control. He'll play the victim. He'll go to the board and say his pregnant wife had a hormonal breakdown and threw him out for no reason." "I know," Celeste said, pacing the living room, the city lights below seeming to mock her. "That was the point of his public spectacle. He's building a narrative." "Then we build a better one, a truer one," Beatrice stated. "First step, you disappear. Not in a scared and hiding way, but in a strategic retreat way. He can't paint you as unstable if you're not there to be provoked. Where can you go that is secure, private, and yours alone?" The answer came to her immediately. The lake house. The house at Lake Arrowhead had been her real home, the place her parents had built, a rustic A-frame of cedar and glass nestled among pine trees. It was where she'd written the first lines of code for what would become Innovatech. It was off-grid, analog, and filled with memories of a time before Julian. It was her fortress of solitude. "Perfect," Beatrice said. "I'll have a security team sweep it and meet you there tomorrow afternoon. They'll be discreet. From now on, you communicate only through encrypted channels. No personal email, no standard calls. Julian has had CEO-level access to your digital life for years. Assume everything is compromised. Go dark, Celeste. Become a ghost." Within the hour, Celeste had packed a single bag. Clothes, a few books, and the original, dog-eared notebooks filled with the algorithms that were the soul of her company. Before she left, she walked into the nursery. It was fully furnished, a serene space of soft grays and yellows. A mobile of hand-carved wooden planets hung over the crib. Julian had insisted on assembling it himself. The memory was now tainted. Another prop in his long con. The sight of it solidified her resolve. This fight was for the tiny person who would one day sleep under those planets. The 2-hour drive up into the mountains was a journey back in time. The sleek freeways of LA gave way to winding mountain roads. The air grew crisp and smelled of pine. When she finally pulled up to the Marlowe family lake house, it was just as she remembered. Solid, unpretentious, real. The next few days were a blur of calculated silence and strategic planning. True to her word, Beatrice arrived with 2 security experts who swept the property for bugs and secured the perimeter. They established a satellite link for a secure internet connection. Beatrice spread a mountain of corporate bylaws and shareholder agreements across the heavy oak dining table. "Here's the situation," Beatrice began, her finger tapping a clause in the Innovatech founding charter. "You own 62% of the company. The other 38% is split among early investors and a small employee stock pool. Julian owns a token 1%, a grant you gave him on your 5th anniversary." She looked up, her expression grim. The irony is sickening. "But he's the CEO," Celeste said. "He chairs the board meetings. He has their ear." "He's the CEO because you appointed him," Beatrice countered. "And according to Article 7, Section B of the bylaws, a clause your father insisted I write in for you, the majority shareholder has the right to call an emergency board meeting at any time, for any reason, and can appoint or dismiss C-suite executives with a simple majority vote. Your 62% is more than a simple majority. It's a monarchy." Celeste stared at the document. "He doesn't know about this clause? He's probably read it, but he hasn't understood its power. He thinks the board is a council of his allies. He's forgotten that you are the board, if you choose to be. His entire strategy is based on the assumption that you'll fight him in divorce court, not in the boardroom." A plan began to form, clean and logical as a line of code. While Julian was in LA, spinning his tale of a volatile, emotional wife, Celeste would prepare for war. Her first call on the encrypted line was to Sebastian Linwood. Sebastian was Innovatech's head of R&D, a brilliant, socially awkward coder who had been her first hire. He was loyal to the technology, not the corporate politics. "Sebastian, it's Celeste." "Celeste, we were worried. Julian told us you were taking some personal time, that you weren't well," he said, his voice full of genuine concern. "I'm fine, Sebastian. I need your help," she said, cutting to the chase. "I need to know what's happening inside. I need to know what Julian is doing." Sebastian hesitated for only a second. "He's consolidating power. He held an all-hands meeting this morning, talked about stability and continued leadership during a difficult personal time. He promoted Vivian to Chief Marketing Officer. People are uneasy." "Vivian is CMO?" The audacity was breathtaking. "Sebastian, I need eyes and ears. Anonymously. I need to know what he's accessing, who he's meeting with, especially financial records." "I can do that," Sebastian said, his voice lowering. "There are back doors, your original back doors. He won't see me coming." For the next week, the lake house became a war room. During the day, Celeste and Beatrice mapped out the legal strategy. They prepared motions, drafted statements, and planned the emergency board meeting down to the second. At night, Celeste would walk by the lake, the cold mountain air clearing her head. She allowed herself to grieve, not for Julian, but for the life she thought she had, for the trust she had so freely given. She remembered his proposal, his promises, the way he'd championed her ideas when she was too shy to voice them herself. Had it all been a lie? Or had the man she married simply eroded over time, worn down by greed and ambition? The question was a painful one, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it. She had to focus on the man he was now. Sebastian's reports came in nightly, encrypted data packets that painted a damning picture. Julian was meeting with investors, assuring them it was business as usual. He was working with the CFO, a man he'd hired 2 years ago, to reallocate budgets. He was moving money, funneling funds into new marketing initiatives that would be run by Vivian. He was acting like a king who had finally inherited his kingdom. One evening, Sebastian sent a file that made Celeste's blood run cold. It was a preliminary draft, drawn up by Julian's personal lawyer for a corporate restructuring. The plan was to create a new parent company with a new board and have that company acquire Innovetech's assets. In the new structure, Julian was listed as the principal shareholder. He was trying to dilute her 62% into oblivion. He was trying to steal her company right out from under her. "This is it," Celeste said, showing the document to Beatrice. "This is his endgame." Beatrice nodded, her expression like stone. "It's bold, sloppy, and illegal as hell, and it's the ammunition we need. He's overplayed his hand. It's time to call the meeting." Celeste looked out the window at the dark, placid water of the lake. She had come here seeking refuge, but it had become her crucible. She had been forged into something new, something harder. The reclusive founder was gone. The CEO's wife was a ghost. In her place was a monarch, ready to reclaim her throne. "Schedule it, Beatrice," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Friday morning. Tell them the majority shareholder will be in attendance." The Innovetech Solutions boardroom was Julian's stage. It was a testament to his aesthetic: a long obsidian black table, chairs of chrome and Italian leather, and a panoramic view of the city he felt he had conquered. He sat at the head of the table, exuding an aura of sober, confident control. Vivienne was seated to his right, in her new, unearned capacity as CMO, looking sleek and powerful in a charcoal pantsuit. The other board members, a collection of venture capitalists and industry veterans Julian had personally courted, murmured amongst themselves. They were confused by the sudden, cryptic summons for an emergency shareholder meeting, but Julian had preemptively soothed them. "I know this is unusual," he'd told them before the meeting officially began, his voice pitched with just the right amount of weary gravity. "As some of you know, Celeste and I are going through a difficult separation. I'm afraid she's not taking it well. This meeting is likely an emotional, impulsive reaction. I ask for your patience. Our priority must be the stability of the company." He had framed the narrative perfectly. They saw him as the steady hand at the tiller, navigating both corporate and personal storms. They saw a man protecting his legacy from an unstable ex-wife. At precisely 10 a.m., the double doors of the boardroom swung open. It was Beatrice Hale who entered first, her presence immediately sucking the casual confidence out of the room. The older board members knew her by reputation, a shark in a Chanel suit. They sat up a little straighter, but it was the person who followed her that caused a collective intake of breath. Celeste. She was not the disheveled, weeping woman Julian had described. She was radiant, composed, and exuded an authority that was palpable. Dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue dress that accommodated her pregnancy without hiding it, she looked not like a victim, but like a queen. Her hair was pulled back, her face was clear, and her eyes, when they met Julian's, were as cold and sharp as ice. Julian's face, for a fleeting second, registered pure shock. He had expected her to dial in, a disembodied, hysterical voice on a speakerphone. He had not expected her to be here, in his domain, looking like this. Vivienne's smile faltered, a flicker of insecurity crossing her features before she masked it with a look of detached professionalism. "Celeste," Julian said, recovering quickly, his voice hardening. "This is highly irregular. We were told you'd be joining remotely." "I changed my mind," Celeste said, her voice calm and clear as it filled the room. She and Beatrice took 2 empty seats opposite Julian. "I felt a matter of this importance required a personal touch. Good morning, everyone." She nodded to the other board members, a few of whom offered weak, uncertain smiles. "As this is an emergency meeting called by the majority shareholder," Beatrice began, her voice crisp and formal as she opened a leather-bound folder, "Ms. Marlowe will be chairing it." This was the first blow. Julian's jaw tightened. "I am the chairman and CEO. A title you hold at the pleasure of the majority shareholder, as stipulated in the corporate bylaws, which I have helpfully distributed," Beatrice said, nodding to the folders that had been placed before each member. "Please, turn to Article 7, Section B." A rustling of paper filled the room. Julian's eyes darted down to the text, his face paling slightly as he read the words he had so arrogantly ignored. He had assumed power was about performance, about charm and relationships. He had forgotten it was written in ink. "According to the agenda," Celeste said, taking command, "the first item of business is a review of executive leadership and corporate governance." She looked directly at Julian. "Julian, for 10 years, I entrusted you with the operational control of my company. While I focused on innovation, you were meant to be its steward. It has recently come to my attention that you have profoundly abused that trust." "This is a personal vendetta," Julian sputtered, trying to regain control. "She's using the company to lash out at me over our divorce." "Am I?" Celeste countered smoothly. She nodded to Beatrice. "We have evidence," Beatrice stated, "that in the last 10 days, Mr. Ashford, without board consultation, has attempted to reallocate significant funds towards unbudgeted marketing ventures, to be managed by a newly appointed executive, Ms. Vivian Dane, whose promotion was also not approved by the board." Vivian flinched as if struck. All eyes turned to her. "Furthermore," Beatrice continued, her voice relentless, "we have a draft proposal, commissioned by Mr. Ashford, outlining a complete corporate restructuring designed to create a new parent entity and dilute the holdings of the current majority shareholder. In layman's terms, he was trying to steal the company." She slid a copy of the proposal down the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Victor Alden, the most respected venture capitalist on the board. He picked it up, his expression turning grim as he read it. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from awkward to arctic. The board members were no longer looking at Julian as a charismatic leader. They were looking at him as a liability. This is taken out of context," Julian stammered, his composure shattering. "These were exploratory ideas for growth." "The only thing you were exploring, Julian," Celeste said, her voice cutting through his defense, "was the depth of your own greed. You conspired with your mistress, a woman you promoted with company funds, to undermine me personally and professionally. You did it in public, to create a narrative of my instability. And you did it in private, to strip me of my life's work. It was a bold plan. But you forgot who you were dealing with." She stood up, her presence commanding the room. Her pregnancy was no longer a sign of vulnerability, but a symbol of her fierce, protective power. "Therefore, as is my right as the owner of 62% of Innovatech Solutions, I call for a vote on the immediate termination of Julian Ashford as CEO and chairman of the board, for cause." She let the words hang in the air. "All in favor?" She raised her hand. Her 62% vote hung in the air, an unassailable fact. It was over before it began. Victor Alden, after a moment's hesitation, slowly raised his hand. "Aye." Another member followed. Then another. It was a cascade. Julian sat, stunned into silence, watching his kingdom crumble. Vivian stared at her hands, her face a mask of humiliation. The power couple of Innovatech, a fiction they had created just days ago, had been exposed as a fraud and a fool. "The motion passes," Celeste announced into the stunned silence. "Julian, your employment at Innovatech Solutions is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. Your corporate accounts and access have already been revoked." As if on cue, 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. "And a final piece of business," Celeste said, turning her attention to the last person. Her gaze fell upon Vivian, who visibly shrank in her chair. "Ms. Dane," Celeste said, her voice devoid of emotion, "your promotion to CMO is rescinded. Your employment is also terminated, effective immediately, for conspiring to defraud the company." Vivian looked up, her eyes wide with panic. She looked at Julian for help, but he was staring into space, a broken man. He couldn't save her. He had never truly had the power to. Celeste surveyed the scene, the defeated lover, the disgraced CEO, the shocked board. She had not screamed, she had not cried. She had simply enforced the rules. "The board will reconvene on Monday to discuss interim leadership," Celeste announced. "This meeting is adjourned." She turned, and with Beatrice at her side, walked out of the boardroom, leaving a trail of silent devastation in her wake. The coup was complete. The crown was hers once more. Victory in the boardroom was not the end of the war. It was the beginning of a messy, brutal insurgency. Julian Ashford was not a man who accepted defeat. Stripped of his title and publicly humiliated, he became a cornered animal, lashing out with a viciousness Celeste had underestimated. His first move was a media blitz. Within hours, stories began to leak to tech blogs and gossip columns, painting a picture of a scorned, vindictive billionaire heiress who used her corporate power to punish her estranged husband. Anonymous sources from within the company spoke of Celeste's erratic behavior and long-standing emotional instability. It was a transparent, desperate smear campaign, but it was effective. The Innovatech stock wobbled. Clients grew nervous. "He's trying to burn the kingdom down now that he can't rule it," Beatrice said grimly, holding up a tablet displaying a particularly nasty headline. They were back in Celeste's home office, which had been converted into a new command center. "Let him," Celeste said, her focus on a screen full of data. She had appointed Sebastian Linwood as interim CTO and an older, steady board member, Victor Alden, as interim CEO to calm the markets. Her own role remained where it was most powerful. Majority owner, the ultimate authority. "He's creating noise. I'm focused on the signal." The signal was the damage Julian had done from the inside. With Sebastian's help, Celeste initiated a full forensic audit of the company's finances during Julian's last year as CEO. What they began to uncover was staggering. "It's a shadow ledger," Sebastian explained during a late-night secure video call, his face pale with exhaustion. He didn't just use company funds for lavish dinners with Vivian, he set up shell corporations, consultancies that billed Innovatech for strategic advice. The invoices were approved by him and the CFO he hired. Millions, Celeste. Millions are gone. It was worse than she thought. This wasn't just infidelity and a power grab. It was grand larceny. He had been systematically bleeding her company dry to fund a new life for himself, likely planning to use the stolen capital to launch his new, restructured version of the company after he'd pushed her out. The betrayal cut deeper than any personal slight. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had plundered her parents' legacy, the work of her hands and mind. While Beatrice's legal team began preparing a criminal case, Julian escalated his attacks. He started poaching. Using the client lists he'd memorized and the relationships he'd built on Celeste's dime, he began contacting Innovatech's key accounts. He offered them a better deal, a future with a new, more dynamic company he was about to launch, free from the drama at Innovatech. This was his most dangerous move. A company like Innovatech was built on trust and long-term contracts. If he could peel away 2 or 3 major clients, it could trigger a catastrophic loss of confidence. Celeste knew she couldn't fight him on his terms. She couldn't out-schmooze him. So she did what she did best. She changed the game. She called a virtual town hall for all Innovatech employees. Her face appeared on screens throughout the company, broadcasting not from a sterile boardroom, but from the R&D lab, the true heart of the company. She didn't talk about Julian. She didn't talk about betrayal. She talked about the future. "For too long," she began, her voice filled with a passion the employees had never heard from her. "Our focus has been on sales, on growth at any cost. We've been chasing market share instead of defining the market. That ends today." She unveiled 3 new projects she had been quietly developing at the lake house, projects that were years ahead of anything their competitors were doing. A predictive logistics AI that could anticipate supply chain disruptions before they happened. A new level of encryption that was quantum computer resistant. It was a vision of the future that was bold, brilliant, and undeniably hers. "I am not just the owner of this company," she told them, her hand resting on her belly. "I am its chief architect. And this," she said, patting a server rack next to her, "is where the magic happens. Not in fancy restaurants or boardrooms. We are going back to our roots." We are going to be a company of builders again, not just salesmen. The speech was a masterstroke. It reignited the passion of the engineers, the developers, the true believers. It reminded them why they had joined Innovatech in the first place. Sebastian later told her the internal chat channels had exploded with excitement. She had reclaimed the company's soul. Meanwhile, Vivian Dane was unraveling. Cast out from Innovatech and abandoned by Julian, who now saw her as part of the baggage from his spectacular failure, she found herself an industry pariah. The flashy diamond ring was gone, likely sold. Her calls to Julian went unanswered. He had used her as a battering ram to break down Celeste's door, and when the ram broke, he'd simply left it in the dirt. She saw the articles Julian planted, branding Celeste as unstable, and she knew they were lies. She had been there. She had seen Celeste's cold fury, her strategic mind at work. She had fatally underestimated her. More than that, she had fatally overestimated Julian. She had fallen for the illusion of power he projected, never realizing it was all borrowed, all conditional on the silence of the woman he was betraying. Desperate and with her options dwindling, Vivian started looking back over her emails, her texts with Julian, trying to piece together where it all went wrong. And in her search, she found them. The wire transfer confirmations, the invoices from shell companies Julian had her approve under the guise of discreet marketing initiatives. She hadn't understood what they were at the time, blinded by ambition and what she'd mistaken for love. Now, she saw them for what they were, evidence. She was not just a co-conspirator, she was a scapegoat with a paper trail leading right to her. Julian hadn't just abandoned her, he had set her up to take the fall. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had helped a man try to destroy a powerful woman, and in the end, he was perfectly willing to destroy her too. Her betrayal had earned her nothing but her own ruin. With shaking hands, she looked up the phone number for Beatrice Hale, attorney at law. She had one last card to play, one last move in a game she had already lost. It wasn't a move for power or for money, it was a move for survival. The call came to Beatrice first. "It's Vivian Dane," Beatrice said, her voice a mixture of surprise and suspicion as she spoke to Celeste over the secure line. "She wants to meet with you. She says she has information that will end this." Celeste's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of seeing Vivian's face again, of sitting in the same room with the woman who had so smugly announced the destruction of her marriage, was nauseating. "It's a trap," Celeste said flatly. "I don't think so," Beatrice countered. "I've been a lawyer for 35 years. I can smell desperation over the phone. She's not a threat anymore, Celeste. She's scorched earth. Julian has cut her loose and she knows she's implicated in the fraud. She's terrified." Celeste considered it. Her logical mind pushed past the emotional revulsion. Vivian was a variable she hadn't accounted for, a loose end. And a desperate person was a dangerous, unpredictable thing. Perhaps it was better to know what she wanted. "Fine," Celeste agreed, her voice hard. "But on my terms, neutral ground, just me and her. You can be nearby, but not in the room. I need to do this alone." She chose a small, quiet cafe in a Pasadena art district, a place with no memories and no significance. When she walked in, Vivian was already there, huddled in a corner booth. The change in her was shocking. The confident, crimson-clad woman from Aria was gone. This Vivian looked small, pale, and haunted. She was nursing a single cup of coffee, her hands wrapped around it as if for warmth. Celeste slid into the booth opposite her. She didn't say a word, just met Vivian's gaze and waited. "Thank you for coming," Vivian began, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't meet Celeste's eyes, focusing instead on the worn tabletop. "I know you have no reason to." "I don't," Celeste said simply. Vivian flinched, but nodded. "I deserve that." She took a shaky breath. "He played me, Celeste. I know that sounds like an excuse, but it's the truth. He made me believe He made me believe you were this cold, detached woman, that your marriage was a business arrangement. He made me feel like I was rescuing him. And the wedding announcement, was that part of the rescue mission? Celeste asked, her voice dangerously soft. Tears welled in Vivian's eyes, but she fought them back. That was hubris. It was cruel. I saw you, with your perfect life, your company, your legacy, and I wanted to be the one to take it. I hated you for having it all, and I was proud that I was the one he chose. It was ugly, and I'm so sorry. The apology hung in the air, shockingly sincere. Celeste felt a flicker of something, not forgiveness, but a grim, shared understanding. She saw Vivian not as a monster, but as a reflection of a different kind of ambition, one that had curdled into something toxic. Why are you here, Vivian? Vivian finally looked up, her eyes pleading. He's going to pin the fraud on me. He had me approve invoices, sign off on payments to consultancies I'd never heard of. I have the emails. He told me they were for market disruption projects. I was so eager to prove myself, I just did it. I have copies of everything. She slid a slim USB drive across the table. This is all of it, Vivian continued. The wire transfers, his private emails about the restructuring plan, texts where he talks about how to handle your emotional reaction. It's everything you need to prove premeditated criminal intent. It's enough to send him to prison. Celeste looked at the drive, then back at Vivian. What do you want in return? Immunity, Vivian said quickly. A deal with the DA, I'll testify against him. I'll tell them everything. I don't want to go to jail for being his fool. Her voice cracked on the last word. He destroyed my life, Celeste. My career is over. He took everything from me, just like he tried to take everything from you. In that moment, Celeste didn't see a rival. She saw another victim of Julian's corrosive narcissism. They were two women on opposite sides of the same man's wreckage. There was no triumph in Vivian's downfall, only a profound sense of waste. He told me you weren't strong enough to run the company, Vivian whispered, a final bitter confession. He said you were just the idea person and that he was the engine. He was wrong. You're not just the engine. You're the whole damn machine. Celeste sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the last few weeks settling on her. The betrayal, the fight, the cold fury. It had all been necessary. It had shown her a strength she didn't know she possessed. But seeing Vivian, broken and desperate, showed her the human cost of Julian's war. It wasn't a victory to be celebrated. Give the drive to my lawyer, Celeste said finally, her voice softer now. She's waiting at the coffee shop across the street. Tell her everything. If you are telling the truth and you cooperate fully, she will speak to the district attorney on your behalf. Vivian's shoulders slumped with relief, a wave of it so profound it was almost painful to watch. Thank you, she breathed. Celeste stood to leave. Celeste, Vivian called after her, her voice small. For what it's worth. I hope it's a girl, and I hope she's just like you. Celeste paused at the door, her back to Vivian. She didn't turn around. She simply gave a slight nod and walked out into the sunlight, leaving the ghosts of the past behind her in the dark corner of the cafe. She had what she needed to end it. Not just with a corporate victory, but with decisive, inescapable justice. The end for Julian Ashford came not with a bang, but with the quiet, inexorable click of handcuffs. Armed with the evidence from the forensic audit and Vivian's damning testimony, the district attorney's office moved swiftly. They arrested him at his temporary residence, a soulless corporate apartment paid for by his dwindling personal funds, on charges of grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The ensuing legal battle was short and brutal. Faced with incontrovertible proof and his former mistress testifying against him, Julian's bravado evaporated. The charming CEO was replaced by a haggard, desperate defendant. The court froze his assets, The board members he had once called allies refused his calls. He was utterly, completely alone. He accepted a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence, ultimately being sentenced to 7 years in a medium-security federal prison. The man who had graced the covers of business magazines was now a cautionary tale, a mugshot on the evening news. Celeste watched the news report from the nursery in her home. She felt no joy, no sense of triumph. Just a quiet, profound finality. It was over. The cancer had been excised. In the months that followed, Celeste poured her energy not into retribution, but into rebuilding. She stepped into the role of active chairwoman of the board, guiding Innovatech with a steady hand and a renewed vision. She promoted Sebastian to permanent CEO, trusting the soul of the company to the man who had always been loyal to it. Together, they purged the growth at all costs culture Julian had instilled, replacing it with a focus on sustainable innovation and employee well-being. The company, under her quiet and decisive leadership, not only stabilized, but began to thrive in a way it never had before. It became a reflection of her, intelligent, resilient, and principled. Her pregnancy progressed, her belly growing with the promise of a new life, a future untainted by the past. The house, once a battleground, became a sanctuary again. She found herself walking through the rooms, no longer seeing ghosts of betrayal, but possibilities for a new kind of family. One cool spring evening, just as the jacaranda trees began to bloom across the city, she went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, but Celeste met every contraction with the same focused strength she had brought to the boardroom. And when it was over, she held her daughter in her arms, a tiny, perfect creature with a tuft of dark hair and her own determined eyes. She named her Isolde Marlowe. Holding Isolde against her chest, the tiny fingers wrapped around one of hers, Celeste felt the last vestiges of bitterness wash away. The pain of the past year had not broken her. It had reforged her. She had been betrayed. Yes, but she had also discovered a power within herself she never knew she had. She had lost a husband, but she had found herself. She was no longer just the founder, the owner, or the scorned wife. She was Celeste Marlowe, chairwoman of Innovatech, a mother, and the sole architect of her own life. She had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only survived, but had emerged stronger, more whole. Her redemption wasn't about being absolved of a sin. It was about reclaiming her own power and her own story. Looking down at her daughter, asleep in her arms, Celeste knew that the legacy she would leave her wouldn't be one of wealth or corporate success, but one of resilience. She would teach her that foundations are meant to be strong, that trust is a precious gift, and that a woman's power is not something to be given away, but something to be owned, wielded with grace, and defended with fire. The future, in that moment, felt limitless. What happens when the life you've meticulously built is shattered by the one person you trusted to protect it? Celeste Marlowe's story is a harrowing journey through the depths of betrayal, a masterclass in reclaiming power when all seems lost. From the stunning humiliation at her own anniversary dinner to the cold, calculated execution of a boardroom coup, she fought back, not with tears, but with the terrifying brilliance her husband had forgotten she possessed. This wasn't just a story about a cheating husband. It was about a queen taking back her kingdom, a founder protecting her legacy, and a mother fighting for her child's future. It reminds us that sometimes the most devastating betrayals are the catalyst for our most profound rebirths. If Celeste's story of resilience and righteous fury resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more gripping stories of moral complexity and ultimate redemption. What would you have done in Celeste's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.
The crystal glass didn't just shatter on the marble floor, it shattered the illusion. One moment I was Maria Caldwell, the pregnant wife of a millionaire, smiling through a charade of perfection. The next, a shard of baccarat was embedded in my cheek, a testament to my husband's rage. He hadn't even looked at me, his eyes fixed on the woman he was trying to impress. The silence that followed was louder than the gasp of 100 guests. They saw the blood, the glass, the monster, but I had been living with him for years. Wealth clung to the penthouse like a second skin, a mingling of imported lilies, chilled champagne, and the crisp whisper of purified air scrubbing the city's grit from existence. 80 floors up, New York shimmered below, a distant constellation beyond the private world Alexander had built behind glass. Tonight was the Caldwell Foundation Gala, a stage for him to display not just generosity, but control. His donations weren't gifts. They were precision investments, each one engineered to yield 100-fold return in influence. I smoothed down the silk of my custom-made gown, the deep emerald fabric chosen to complement my eyes, or so Alexander's stylist had said. In reality, it was chosen to artfully conceal the gentle swell of my 5-month pregnancy, a fact we hadn't yet made public. It was another of Alexander's strategic reveals, waiting for the perfect market upswing or media opportunity. My life was a series of managed press releases. My hand rested instinctively on my stomach, a gesture of both protection and profound connection. This baby, our baby, was the one pure thing in this gilded cage. He was a secret I held close, a tiny, fluttering heartbeat that was mine alone in the quiet moments before dawn. "Maria, darling." Alexander's voice, smooth as scotch but with an edge of steel, cut through my thoughts. He glided to my side, a perfect specimen of tailored success in his Tom Ford tuxedo. His hand found the small of my back, a possessive gesture that looked like affection to the untrained eye. To me, it was a leash. "Stop hiding in the corners. People will talk." "I was just admiring the view, Alexander," I said, my voice a practiced melody of calm. "The view is in the room, not outside," he corrected, his thumb pressing just a little too hard. "It's the people who write the checks. Go talk to the Vanderbilts. I saw Eleanor eyeing your necklace." The necklace in question was the Star of Caldwell, a diamond so large and flawless it felt like a beautiful weight on my collarbone, another one of his strategic acquisitions. I was merely the mannequin. I nodded, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Of course." As I turned, my eyes met a pair across the room. They belonged to Isabella Rossi, a woman whose name was whispered in the circles we moved in. She was an art curator, impossibly chic, with a razor-sharp wit and a reputation for acquiring more than just paintings. She was Alexander's latest project, his new shiny object of fascination. Her crimson dress was a slash of defiance in the sea of muted tones, and she wore it like armor. She held Alexander's gaze for a fraction too long, a silent conversation passing between them that I was not privy to. It was a language of power, lust, and shared secrets. I had once been fluent in it. Now I was the forgotten dialect. I spent the next hour drifting through conversations, a ghost in my own home. I discussed art with a woman who owned a Monet, charity with a man who exploited third-world labor, and summer plans with people who considered the Hamptons slumming it. Each smile was an effort, each laugh a betrayal to the screaming anxiety in my chest. My baby kicked, a small, insistent reminder of the life that depended on me, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. I excused myself, seeking refuge on the terrace. The wind was sharp, but it was real. It whipped a strand of hair across my face, and for a moment I could breathe. I watched the city pulse below, a living, breathing entity, so unlike the sterile perfection of my life. The terrace door slid open. It was Isabella. "He'll be furious you're out here," she said, her voice surprisingly soft. She stood beside me, not looking at me, but at the skyline. He hates when his possessions aren't where he left them. The insult was so direct, so devoid of pretense, it almost made me laugh. I'm not a possession. She finally turned to me, her dark eyes assessing. Aren't you? This dress, that necklace, this baby. She gestured vaguely toward my stomach. It's all part of his portfolio. The beautiful wife, the heir. It's a good look for him. And what are you? I asked, my voice colder than the wind. A short-term investment, a speculative asset? A flicker of something, hurt, respect, crossed her face before it was replaced by a wry smile. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a woman who knows that in this world, you either own or you are owned. I'm just trying to get the best possible price. The honesty was disarming. We were two sides of the same coin, both bartering our souls in Alexander's marketplace. Before I could respond, the door slid open again, and Alexander was there, his face a thundercloud. What is this, a secret meeting? His eyes darted between us, suspicion coiling in his gaze. Just getting some air, darling, Isabella said, her tone shifting instantly to a playful purr. She laid a hand on his arm. Maria was just telling me how much she loves the new sculpture. You have such exquisite taste. Alexander's focus shifted to me, his eyes narrowing. Is that right? Because you looked like you were plotting. You know I don't like that. He stepped closer, his presence sucking the air from the terrace. He was smiling, but his eyes were chips of ice. You've been off all night, Maria. Moody. It's unbecoming. I'm just a little tired, I murmured, my hand instinctively going to my stomach. His eyes followed the movement, and his lip curled in a sneer. Don't use that as an excuse. My mother worked in a factory until the day I was born. You stand around looking pretty. It's not that difficult. The cruelty of it, so casual and so public, stole my breath. Isabella watched, her expression unreadable. She was a spectator at the Colosseum, waiting to see who the lions would devour. Perhaps Mrs. Caldwell needs a drink to relax, Isabella suggested, her voice silky. She picked up a flute of champagne from a passing tray and handed it to Alexander. Go on, Alexander. Be a good husband. It was a test, a power play. She was goading him, using me as the pawn to prove her influence over him. Alexander took the glass, his eyes never leaving mine. My wife doesn't drink, he said softly, a dangerous glint in his eyes. But perhaps she needs a reminder of her duties. He took a step toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew this look. It was the precursor to a storm, the chilling calm before the violence. Alexander, don't, I whispered, taking a step back. Don't what? He hissed, his voice low and menacing. Don't ask my wife to be charming at my own party. Don't ask her to be grateful for the life I've given her. He was playing to his audience of one. He needed to show Isabella that he was the one in control, that I was nothing, that she was the one with the real power. You're making a scene, I said, my voice trembling. I'm making a scene? He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You're the one who's always miserable, the one who can't even pretend to be happy. You are an embarrassment. And then, with a flick of his wrist, he threw the glass. It wasn't aimed at the floor. It was aimed at me. I flinched, turning my head, but it was too late. The crystal flute struck the wall beside my head, exploding in a shower of glass and champagne. The cold liquid drenched my hair and shoulder, and a sharp, searing pain erupted on my cheek. I reached up, my fingers coming away wet and sticky with blood. A tiny, razor-sharp shard of the baccarat crystal was embedded in my skin, just below my eye. The world went silent. The city noise, the distant music, the wind. It all faded away. There was only the thudding of my own heart, the sting in my cheek, and the two figures standing before me. Alexander looked at the blood on my face and then at his hand, as if surprised by what it had done. But there was no remorse in his eyes. There was only annoyance, as if I had inconvenienced him by bleeding on his terrace. Isabella's mask of cool indifference finally cracked. For a single, unguarded moment, I saw genuine shock, even a flicker of fear. She hadn't expected this. She had poked the bear, and it had mauled the wrong person. Then the mask was back in place. She looked away, toward the glittering, indifferent city, and in that moment, I understood. She was owned, just like me, and the price was higher than either of us had ever imagined. The silence on the terrace stretched for an eternity. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, punctuated only by the distant wail of a siren rising from the streets below. The single drop of blood that had welled up from the cut on my cheek began a slow, deliberate journey down my skin, a tear of crimson tracing a path through my shock. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was frozen, but my mind was racing, replaying the last 30 seconds in a sickening loop. The sneer, the flick of the wrist, the explosion of glass, the searing pain. Alexander was the first to break the tableau. He let out a sigh, a sound of pure, unadulterated irritation, as if I had spilled wine on his favorite suit. He straightened his tuxedo jacket, his movements precise and controlled. He was already managing the situation, containing the damage. "For God's sake, Maria, don't be so dramatic," he said, his voice a low growl. He pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his breast pocket, not to offer it to me, but to dab at a small splash of champagne on his own lapel. "It barely touched you." It barely touched me. The words echoed in the silent space between us. He wasn't looking at the blood, at the shard of glass still embedded in my skin. He was looking at the inconvenience, the mess. I was the mess. My gaze shifted to Isabella. The shock on her face had been replaced by a carefully constructed neutrality. She refused to meet my eyes, focusing instead on a point just over my shoulder. She was complicit in her silence, an accessory after the fact. Her little power play had spiraled out of her control, and now she was retreating, leaving me alone in the wreckage. She had wanted to see who the lions would devour, and having seen, she had decided it was better to be on the lion's side. "You should go inside and clean yourself up," Alexander commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "People will start to wonder where we are." He finally looked at me, his eyes cold and hard. "And you will say you slipped, that you stumbled and knocked a glass over. Do you understand me?" It wasn't a question. It was an order. It was the script for the next scene in our carefully produced play. I was to be the clumsy, pregnant wife, and he, the concerned, doting husband. The truth was to be swept under the rug, along with the shards of crystal. My voice, when it finally came, was a hoarse whisper. "You threw a glass at me." The statement hung in the air, a fragile, undeniable truth. Alexander's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, invading my personal space, his sheer physical presence a threat. "Don't be ridiculous. It slipped. Now go. We'll discuss your behavior later." His gaze flickered toward the main party room, where the silhouettes of his guests danced and laughed, oblivious. His reputation was out there, mingling, drinking, and writing checks. He couldn't afford for it to be tarnished by something as trivial as his wife's blood. Without another word, he turned and offered his arm to Isabella. "Come, my dear. Let's not let a minor spill ruin the evening." Isabella hesitated for only a second before taking his arm, her crimson dress a bloody smear against his black tuxedo. She cast one last, fleeting glance at me, a look I couldn't decipher. Was it pity? Guilt? Or just the cold calculation of a survivor? Then they were gone, swallowed back into the warmth and light of the party, leaving me alone in the cold, dark silence. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I finally moved, pushing the terrace door open and slipping past the throng of guests. No one noticed me. I was invisible, a shadow moving along the edges of their glittering world. I made my way to our private wing of the penthouse, my hand protectively covering the cut on my cheek. The master bathroom was a cavern of white marble and gold fixtures, a temple of sterile luxury. I stared at my reflection in the vast, illuminated mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her eyes were wide with a terror I had been suppressing for years. Her face was pale, except for the ugly, angry gash on her cheek. The emerald dress and the diamond necklace were a costume, a mockery of the woman trapped inside. With trembling fingers, I reached for a pair of tweezers from the vanity. My reflection mimicked the movement, her hand shaking just as badly as mine. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The tip of the tweezer touched the shard of glass. It was small, no bigger than a grain of rice, but it was lodged deep. I bit my lip, tasting the salt of my own tears as I pulled. The shard came free with a sickening little tug, and a fresh wave of blood followed it. I dropped the piece of glass into the marble sink. It made a tiny, insignificant tink, a sound that seemed to amplify the silence of the room. I stared at it, this small, sharp piece of truth. It was proof. It was real. I hadn't imagined it. He had thrown a glass at me. I splashed my face with cold water, cleaning the wound as best I could. The bleeding subsided, leaving behind a raw, angry line. I knew it would scar. A permanent reminder. Another mark on my soul, this one just visible on the surface. I thought about the baby. My baby. A fierce, primal wave of protectiveness washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just my pain, my humiliation. It was about the life I was carrying, the innocent soul who deserved more than a mother who was a ghost and a father who was a monster. For years, I had made excuses for Alexander. His temper was a product of his stressful job. His control was a manifestation of his love. His cruelty was a rare lapse, an exception to the rule. But staring at that shard of glass in the sink, I knew I was lying to myself. This wasn't an exception. It was the rule. The luxury, the parties, the philanthropy, that was the exception. The cold, quiet rage, the casual cruelty, the iron fist in the velvet glove, that was the real Alexander Caldwell. The sound of the bathroom door opening made me jump. Alexander stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The party was clearly over. "Are you done with your little melodrama?" he asked, his voice laced with contempt. I didn't answer. I just stared at him. My silence a newfound weapon. He walked over to the sink, saw the shard of glass, and scoffed. He turned on the faucet, washing it down the drain without a second thought. He was erasing the evidence, erasing the truth. "You'll have the best plastic surgeon in the city look at that tomorrow," he said, gesturing to my cheek. "No one will ever know." He took a sip of his whiskey. "I've already spoken to the staff. They know the story. You slipped. You were clumsy. End of discussion." He expected me to nod, to acquiesce, to be the good, obedient wife. But something inside me had broken tonight, right along with that baccarat flute. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now mingled with something else, a hard, unyielding core of defiance. "I'm not a child, Alexander," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "You don't get to tell me what happened." He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged. "I'm not having this conversation tonight, Maria. I'm tired. And frankly, you've disappointed me." He turned to leave, considering the matter closed. "I could have been blinded," I said to his back. "The glass could have hit my eye." He stopped, his back still to me. "But it didn't," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "So let's not dwell on hypotheticals. Be grateful for what you have. Most women would kill to be in your position." He walked out, leaving me alone once more in the marble mausoleum. He was right. Most women would kill to be in my position. But for the first time, I realized my position was killing me. And as I stood there, my hand on my belly, I knew I had to find a way out. Not just for me, but for the tiny, innocent life that was counting on me. The silence of our home had always been a sign of Alexander's control. But tonight, it felt different. It felt like the quiet before a storm. a storm that I was going to have to learn to unleash. The next 48 hours passed in a surreal, muffled haze. Alexander acted as if nothing had happened. He left for his office at dawn, his footsteps silent on the plush carpets, and returned long after I had retreated to the sterile comfort of our bedroom. He sent flowers, 24 white roses, a funereal arrangement that felt more like a threat than an apology. A text message followed. "Dr. Marlowe's office will call to schedule your appointment. He's the best." There was no, "I'm sorry," no, "Are you okay?" Just the cold, efficient logistics of erasing his crime. I spent the days in a state of suspended animation, wandering the vast, empty penthouse like a specter. The staff moved around me with downcast eyes and hushed voices. They knew. They had heard the crash, seen me retreat with blood on my face. They had been given the official story. Mrs. Caldwell had a dizzy spell, she's fine, just a little shaken, and they played their parts perfectly. Their silence was bought and paid for, just like my own. The cut on my cheek was a throbbing physical reminder of the truth. I covered it with concealer, a futile attempt to hide the ugliness. But I could still feel it, a tiny fault line in the smooth facade of my face. It was on the third morning that the world tilted on its axis. I was sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows, nursing a cup of herbal tea, when my phone buzzed with an alert from a news app. I usually ignored them. Endless notifications about stock market fluctuations and political scandals that felt a world away. But this one was different. The headline was a gut punch. Leaked video shows billionaire Alexander Caldwell assaulting pregnant wife at lavish NYC gala. My heart stopped. My hand trembled so violently that the tea sloshed over the rim of the cup, scalding my fingers. I barely felt it. With a sense of dread so profound it was nauseating, I tapped the link. The video was grainy, shot from a low angle, likely from a phone hidden at waist level. It was clearly filmed by one of the catering staff, someone moving through the party, their perspective obscured by trays of canapes and champagne flutes. The audio was muffled, a cacophony of music and chatter. But then the camera angle shifted, zooming in shakily on the terrace. And there we were, 3 figures silhouetted against the glittering skyline. Alexander, Isabella, and me. The video had no sound of our conversation, only the ambient noise of the party. But the visuals were damningly clear. You could see Alexander's face, contorted with rage. You could see my fear, the way I recoiled. You could see Isabella, a silent, watchful presence. And then you could see the flick of his wrist, the explosion of the glass, my hand flying to my cheek. The camera lingered for a few horrifying seconds on my face, the zoom unable to focus properly, but the dark smudge of blood stark against my pale skin. Then it showed Alexander and Isabella turning their backs on me and walking away, a portrait of chilling indifference. The video ended abruptly. It was only 27 seconds long. 27 seconds that ripped the carefully constructed fabric of our lives to shreds. I watched it again and again. Each time, a fresh wave of sickness and shame washed over me. The world was now seeing what I had lived with in private. My deepest humiliation, my most vulnerable moment, was now a piece of viral content, being shared, commented on, and dissected by millions of strangers. My phone began to buzz incessantly. Texts, missed calls, social media notifications. The dam had broken. "Maria, is this real? Call me." From a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. "Alexander Caldwell is a monster. Justice for Maria." A tweet from a complete stranger. "That poor woman, and she's pregnant." A comment on a blog. The story was everywhere. The New York Post, the Daily Mail, Forbes, even the BBC. The video was the lead story on every news channel. Pundits were analyzing it frame by frame. Body language experts were dissecting Alexander's narcissistic rage. Domestic violence hotlines were being flooded with calls. My private pain had become public property. I felt a strange, terrifying sense of dissociation. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life. But the woman with the blood on her cheek was me. The monster was my husband. The sound of the front door slamming open jolted me back to reality. Alexander stormed in, his face pale and slick with sweat. He wasn't wearing his usual immaculate suit. His shirt was untucked, his tie ripped from his collar. He held his phone in his hand like a weapon. "What did you do?" he roared, his voice echoing through the cavernous apartment. I didn't do anything," I stammered, shrinking back into the chair. "Don't lie to me!" He strode across the room and loomed over me, his shadow falling across my body. "You leaked this! You wanted to destroy me!" "No, Alexander, I swear I don't know how—" "Who did you talk to? Which one of your pathetic gold-digging friends did you cry to?" He was breathing heavily, his eyes wild with a panic I had never seen before. This wasn't his usual cold, controlled anger. This was fear. Raw, primal fear. His empire was built on a foundation of public perception, and that foundation was crumbling. "I didn't talk to anyone," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I did what you told me. I said I slipped." He stared at me, his mind racing, trying to find another explanation, another person to blame. "The staff. It must have been one of the staff. I'll find them. I'll sue them into oblivion. I'll ruin them." He started pacing, a caged animal, running his hands through his hair. "My board is calling an emergency meeting. Our stock has plummeted 30% since the market opened. 30%. Do you have any idea what that means?" He kicked an ottoman, sending it flying across the room. "This is a disaster. A complete and utter disaster." He wasn't worried about me. He wasn't worried about the baby. He wasn't even worried about the fact that he had committed an act of violence. He was worried about the stock price. The phone rang, a shrill, insistent sound. It was his PR chief. Alexander snatched it up. "What? No, of course it's not what it looks like. A deepfake? Can we say it's a deepfake? What do you mean it's too clear? A joint statement? With her? Are you insane? Fine. Draft something. Something about stress and a private matter, and make it good or you're fired." He hung up, throwing the phone onto the sofa. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not just anger, but a sliver of desperation. He needed me. He needed me to play my part, to help him clean up his mess. The power dynamic, for the first time in our marriage, had shifted, just a fraction of an inch. "They're drafting a statement for us to release," he said, his voice calmer now, more calculated. "We'll say we were having a private argument, that I was careless with a gesture, and that we deeply regret the invasion of our privacy. We'll say we are united, that we are dealing with this as a family, and that we ask for space as we prepare for the birth of our child." He was using our baby, using this unborn child as a shield, a prop to garner sympathy. The thought was so vile, so manipulative, it extinguished the last embers of fear within me, replacing them with a cold, hard rage. I stood up, my own body feeling strangely steady. I walked over to the window, turning my back on him. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, turning to face him. "I will not stand next to you and lie. I will not be your prop. I will not help you cover this up." He stared at me, dumbfounded, as if the furniture had suddenly started talking back. "Maria, this is not the time for your little tantrums. This is about survival. Our survival." "No, Alexander," I said, my hand resting on my stomach, a gesture that was no longer just protective, but defiant. "This is about my survival, and his. The viral storm had been meant to destroy me, to humiliate me. But as I stood there, looking at the panic in my husband's eyes, I realized it had done something else entirely. It had given me a strange, terrifying kind of freedom. The worst had happened. The secret was out, and I had nothing left to lose. The penthouse, once a symbol of my ascent into a world of unimaginable luxury, had transformed into a prison of suffocating silence. Alexander, consumed by a frantic damage control campaign, was rarely home. He was a phantom presence, his existence marked only by the discarded newspapers with his face on the cover and the faint, lingering scent of his expensive cologne in the elevator. When he was there, the air crackled with a tension so thick I felt I had to push my way through it to get from one room to another. We didn't speak. We orbited each other like two hostile planets, held in a delicate, dangerous balance by a gravity of shared history and mutual resentment. My gilded cage now had bars made of public opinion. I was trapped not just by Alexander's wealth, but by the world's sudden, intense scrutiny. Paparazzi were camped outside our building, their long-lensed cameras aimed at our windows like sniper rifles. Every time I looked down at the street, I saw them, a pack of wolves waiting for a glimpse of their wounded prey. I was a headline, a hashtag, a cautionary tale. Dr. Marlowe, the plastic surgeon Alexander had hired, was as discreet and seamless as his work. He made a house call, his face a perfect mask of professional sympathy. He examined the cut on my cheek under a bright, sterile light in my own bathroom. "It's clean, but it will certainly scar if we don't intervene," he said, his voice a soothing murmur. "I can perform a minor revision under local anesthetic, a few micro-stitches. In a few months, with some laser treatments, it will be virtually invisible." Virtually invisible. The words hung in the air. That was Alexander's entire philosophy on life. Make the ugly things disappear. I looked at my reflection. The cut wasn't just a wound, it was a brand. It was the one piece of tangible evidence I had, written on my own skin. "No, thank you, doctor," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I think I'll let it heal on its own." Dr. Marlowe raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I would strongly advise against that, Mrs. Caldwell, for cosmetic reasons." "My husband is paying you for your medical advice, not your cosmetic opinions," I replied, a newfound boldness surprising me. "And I am declining the procedure." He was taken aback, clearly unused to a patient, especially one in my position, defying his expert recommendation. He packed his bag in a flustered silence, promising to send a bill to Mr. Caldwell's office. When he left, I felt a small, triumphant victory. It was the first decision I had made for myself about my own body in years. This scar would be my own, a reminder of why I couldn't go back. My days fell into a strange, lonely routine. I would wake up, eat the breakfast prepared by a silent chef, and then wander the apartment. I started reading again, devouring novels I had bought years ago and never opened. I was searching for escape, for lives and worlds that were not my own. But every story of a woman finding her strength, of a hero overcoming adversity, felt like a personal indictment. What was I doing? Hiding in my cage, waiting for my captor to decide my fate. The baby was my constant companion. His kicks and flutters a secret conversation between us. I would talk to him, my hand pressed against my stomach, whispering promises that I had no idea how I would keep. "I'll get us out of here," I would murmur into the silent rooms. "I promise you'll be safe. You'll be free." One afternoon, while scrolling through the endless torrent of news articles about my own life, I stumbled upon a name, Anya Sharma. She was a lawyer, but the articles didn't describe her as a typical high-powered attorney. They called her a giant slayer, a champion for the voiceless. She specialized in representing women in high-profile, high-net-worth domestic abuse cases. Her client list was a secret, but the results were not. She had taken on some of the most powerful men in the country and won. I found her firm's website. It was minimalist and professional, with a simple contact form. Staring at the blank fields, my heart began to pound. This was a line I could not uncross. Contacting a lawyer was an act of war. Alexander had an army of them on retainer, men who were paid to bury people like me. For an hour, I just stared at the screen. Fear and resolve wrestled within me. The fear was a familiar companion, a cold hand on the back of my neck. It whispered all the reasons I shouldn't. He'll find out. He'll take the baby. He'll destroy you. You have no money of your own, no power. But the resolve was new. It was a tiny flame, kindled by the humiliation on the terrace and fanned by the global reaction. The world, in its strange, voyeuristic way, was on my side. For the first time, I wasn't entirely alone. My fingers, moving as if with a will of their own, began to type. Name, Maria Caldwell. Email. I used a new anonymous email address I had created the day before. Message. I paused, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What could I say? My billionaire husband threw a glass at my head and the whole world saw it? It sounded insane. I took a deep breath and wrote from the heart. My name is Maria Caldwell. You may have seen my name in the news. The video is real. I am a prisoner in my own home and I am scared. But I am more scared of bringing my child into this life. I need help. I don't have access to my own money, but I need to know if I have any options. Please. I hit send before I could lose my nerve. The moment I did, a wave of pure terror washed over me. I threw the phone onto the sofa as if it were on fire. What had I done? Alexander had surveillance software on everything. He monitored my calls, my emails, my credit card statements. He would know. But as the minutes ticked by and the world didn't end, the terror slowly subsided, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. I had sent a message in a bottle, a flare into the dark night. Now, all I could do was wait and see if anyone would answer. The gilded cage was still locked, but for the first time I felt like I might have found a key. The reply came 24 hours later. It was a simple, unadorned email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, Your Inquiry. We have received your message. If you are able to talk securely, please be at the southeast corner of the Conservatory Garden in Central Park tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone. Look for a woman reading a book with a plain blue cover. Do not bring your phone. This email will self-delete in 5 minutes. There was no name, no signature, just cold, clear instructions. It was cloak and dagger, something out of a spy novel, and the paranoia it induced was terrifying. But beneath the fear was a spark of exhilaration. Someone had answered my flare. Getting out of the penthouse alone and without my phone was a challenge in itself. Alexander had assigned a driver, a hulking man named Sergei, with a neck as thick as my thigh, to be my shadow. He wasn't a chauffeur, he was a warden. That morning, I feigned a sudden, intense craving for a specific brand of artisanal pickles, sold only at a small deli in the West Village. It was the kind of nonsensical, demanding behavior Alexander expected from a pampered, pregnant woman. Sergei, I called, affecting a tone of weary urgency. I need you to go get something for me. It's very important. He looked at me with his flat, expressionless eyes. Mr. Caldwell said I am not to leave you. Mr. Caldwell also doesn't want to be woken up at 3 a.m. by his hysterical wife crying about pickles, I countered, putting a hand to my forehead as if staving off a wave of nausea. Trust me. This is the easier option for everyone. It's for the baby. The baby was my trump card, the one thing that could override Alexander's direct orders. Sergei hesitated, then gave a curt nod. It would take him at least an hour to get downtown and back. The window was open. As soon as his car disappeared into the stream of traffic, I moved. I left my phone on the kitchen counter. I grabbed a cashmere shawl, a pair of oversized sunglasses, and a prepaid Metro card I had stashed away months ago after a rare, supervised solo trip to a museum. I took the service elevator down to the sub-basement, my heart pounding with every floor we passed. I emerged into a grimy loading dock, scurrying past dumpsters and laundry carts into the anonymous chaos of a midtown side street. The subway was a shock to the system. The noise, the crowds, the sheer, unvarnished humanity of it all was overwhelming after years of sanitized, chauffeur-driven isolation. I felt like a foreigner in my own city. But I also felt invisible. Just another face in the crowd, and the anonymity was intoxicating. I arrived at the Conservatory Garden with 10 minutes to spare. The garden was an oasis of tranquility, a world away from the concrete and steel that surrounded it. I found the southeast corner near a wrought iron bench overlooking a profusion of white roses. And there she was. A woman sat on the bench, engrossed in a book with a plain, royal blue cover. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of calm, focused intensity. She was dressed in simple, elegant trousers and a silk blouse, understated and professional. This had to be Anya Sharma. I approached slowly, my hands clammy. "Excuse me?" I began, my voice barely a whisper. "I was just admiring your book." She looked up, her eyes scanning my face, taking in the sunglasses, the shawl, and the faint, fading bruise on my cheek that no concealer could fully hide. A flicker of recognition, and then a small, reassuring smile. "It's a good one," she said, closing the book and patting the empty space beside her on the bench. "Please sit. I'm Anya." "Maria," I breathed, sinking onto the bench, my legs suddenly weak. "I know," she said gently. "Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy." For a few moments, we sat in silence, watching a groundskeeper meticulously prune the rose bushes. "He has people watching the building," I said finally, "and my phone, my email. I'm sure he monitors everything." "Standard procedure for men like your husband," Anya said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Control is their oxygen. The first thing we need to do is establish a secure line of communication. We'll get you a new phone, a clean one. We'll only speak through encrypted apps." She spoke with such calm authority, it was as if she were discussing the weather. It was clear she had done this 100 times before. "I don't have any money," I confessed, the words tasting like ash. "He controls everything. The accounts are all in his name. I have an allowance, but he tracks every penny." "Also standard," she said with a nod. "Don't worry about my fee for now. In cases like this, we can petition the court to have your husband cover your legal costs. A judge will often grant it to ensure a level playing field. And Alexander Caldwell, after that video, is not going to want to fight that motion in front of a judge." The idea that Alexander could be forced to pay for my legal battle against him was a revelation. It was a small crack in his fortress of power. "What do I do?" I asked, feeling a desperate sense of helplessness. "Where do I even begin?" Anya turned to face me, her expression serious. "First, you need to understand that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Men like Alexander don't just let go. They fight, and they fight dirty. He will try to paint you as an unstable, vindictive gold digger. He will use your pregnancy, your emotions, anything he can against you." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "So, our first job is to gather evidence. Quietly. You are our inside source. I need you to be a detective in your own home. Financial records, emails, text messages, anything that proves his control, his temper, his infidelity. Does he keep a second phone? Does he have a private office in the penthouse? A safe? I thought of the sleek black titanium safe hidden behind a false panel in his walk-in closet. I had seen him use it only a handful of times. I didn't know the combination. "There's a safe," I told her. Anya's eyes lit up. "Good. That's very good. We won't do anything about it yet, but it's a start." Suddenly, a new voice cut through our conversation. "I thought I might find you here." I whipped my head around, my blood turning to ice. A woman stood a few feet away, her arms crossed. It was Isabella Rossi. My first instinct was panic. She would go straight to Alexander. I was caught. It was over. But Anya remained perfectly calm. She simply looked at Isabella and said, "You're late." I stared at Anya, then at Isabella, my mind struggling to connect the dots. You know each other?" Isabella walked over, her gaze fixed on me. The wry, cynical mask was gone. Her face was pale and her eyes were shadowed with what looked like genuine fear. "Anya is my lawyer too," she said quietly. The world tilted again. The mistress. My husband's mistress was here with my lawyer. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Alexander is a monster, Maria," Isabella said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know you have no reason to believe me. and even less reason to trust me. I was a coward on that terrace. I was scared. When he threw that glass, I saw what he was capable of, and I realized that one day it could be me. She took a shaky breath. He promised me everything. A gallery, a partnership, but it was all lies. It was all about control. The day after the video leaked, he got violent with me. He blamed me for goading him, for ruining his reputation. She didn't elaborate, but the dark bruise hidden under the sleeve of her silk blouse told its own story. I was speechless. We were not rivals. We were fellow victims, caught in the same web, manipulated by the same master puppeteer. Isabella came to me 2 days ago, Anya explained gently. She is willing to testify, to tell the court everything she knows about Alexander's business dealings, his temper, his threats. She can corroborate your story. An alliance. A secret, unthinkable alliance. The wife and the mistress united against the man who thought he owned them both. It was a twist I could never have imagined. Isabella looked at me, her eyes pleading. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Maria, and I'm not asking for it, but I want to help you. I want to help us both. He will try to crush us, but maybe together, maybe we stand a chance. I looked from her face to Anya's. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface. But for the first time, it was overshadowed by something else. A flicker of power, a whisper of hope. I was no longer a lone operative. I had an ally. We had a general. The war had just begun. Alexander Caldwell believed the world was a machine, a complex, intricate system of levers and gears that if you were smart enough and ruthless enough, you could operate to your exact specifications. For 45 years, he had been the master engineer. He pulled a lever and money flowed. He turned a gear and people obeyed. His marriage, his business, his public image, all were cogs in the grand, gleaming machine of his life. The video was not a malfunction, it was a wrench thrown into the works. In the days following the leak, Alexander's first instinct was to apply overwhelming force. He dispatched his legal team, a pack of sharks who smelled blood in the water, to file lawsuits against every blog and news outlet that hosted the video. He hired a team of digital forensics experts to hunt down the source of the leak, offering a 7-figure reward for the name of the caterer who had dared to film him. He orchestrated a PR campaign designed to reframe the narrative, painting himself as a man under immense pressure, protecting his pregnant wife from the intrusive glare of the media. But the machine was not responding. The lawsuits were met with derision, framed by the media as a classic example of a billionaire bully trying to silence the truth. The caterer had vanished, likely paid off by a rival media outlet and hidden away until the opportune moment. And the PR campaign was a spectacular failure. The public wasn't buying it. The image of him throwing a glass at his pregnant wife was too visceral, too damning. It had seared itself into the collective consciousness. His world, once so meticulously controlled, began to fracture. He sat in his cavernous office, the skyline of Manhattan spread before him like a kingdom in revolt. The numbers on his screen were all red. Caldwell Industries stock was in a freefall. Board members, who had once fawned over his every word, were now calling for an independent investigation into his conduct. Longtime business partners were suddenly re-evaluating their relationship with the company. The machine was grinding to a halt, and he didn't know how to fix it. His rage, usually a cold, precise instrument he could wield at will, was now a hot, chaotic inferno burning inside him. He had smashed a tablet against the wall that morning, the shattered screen a mirror of his own splintering control. His father's voice echoed in his head, a ghost from his childhood. Sentiment is a weakness, Alexander. Power is the only currency that matters. Never let them see you bleed. His father, a self-made tyrant who had built a scrap metal empire through sheer, brutal force of will, had forged Alexander in his own image. He had taught him that the world was a battlefield, and you were either a predator or you were prey. He had beaten the sentiment out of him, replacing it with a relentless, insatiable hunger for more. More money, more power, more control. He had acquired Maria the same way he had acquired a company or a piece of art. She was beautiful, elegant, from a good family that had fallen on hard times. She was the perfect accessory, a testament to his success. He had believed he was giving her a paradise, a life of unimaginable ease. He had bought her, and he expected her to be grateful for the transaction. Her defiance now was incomprehensible to him. It was as if a painting had decided to walk out of its frame. His attempts to control her were failing. She was polite, distant, and utterly immovable. Her quiet no to his demand for a joint statement had been a declaration of war, and he was losing. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Blackwood is on line 1. Robert Blackwood was the patriarch of the Caldwell Industries Board, a man whose connections ran as deep as the foundations of Wall Street. Alexander jabbed the speakerphone button. "Robert," he said, forcing a calm he did not feel. "Alexander," Blackwood's voice was gravelly, impatient. "We have a problem. The consortium for the Tokyo project is pulling out. They cited the reputational risk associated with your current situation. The Tokyo project was Alexander's magnum opus, a multi-billion-dollar development that was meant to be his legacy. They can't do that. We have a contract. They're willing to pay the penalty clause, Alexander. They'd rather lose $100 million than be in business with you right now. The video has gone global. You're toxic." Toxic. The word hit him like a physical blow. "I'll fix it," Alexander insisted, his voice tight. "How?" Blackwood demanded. "Your wife has gone silent. She hasn't been seen, hasn't made a statement. The world thinks you have her locked in that ivory tower of yours. It looks terrible." "She's pregnant. She's resting." "She's a liability," Blackwood shot back. "And so are you. The board has voted. We're invoking the morality clause in your contract. We're placing you on an indefinite leave of absence, effective immediately." The line went dead. Alexander stared at the phone, his mind reeling. His own company, his own board. They were cutting him out. He felt a wave of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under him. His father's voice was back, dripping with contempt. "Weak. You let them beat you." He swept his arm across his desk, sending a cascade of papers, awards, and photographs crashing to the floor. One of the photos was of him and Maria on their wedding day. They were smiling. A perfect couple. A perfect lie. He sank into his chair, the rage momentarily extinguished, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. For the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of something other than anger or ambition. It was a cold, unfamiliar feeling. It was fear. Not the fear of losing money, but the fear of losing everything. The fear of being nothing. His mind turned to Isabella. She had been his escape, his validation. She was sharp, ambitious, and unburdened by the cloying sentimentality he despised in Maria. But since the incident, she too had grown distant. She wasn't answering his calls. He had gone to her apartment the other day, pounding on the door, but she hadn't answered. He had thought she was just being difficult, playing a game. Now, a darker suspicion began to creep in. He had built his empire on the principle of control. He controlled his company, his wife, his mistress, his public image. But the cracks were spreading, the facade crumbling, and the machine was breaking down. He was losing his grip on all of it. He picked up the framed photo from the floor. He looked at Maria's face, at the smile that had always seemed just a little too perfect. He had never once stopped to consider what she was thinking, what she was feeling. She was an object, a beautiful, valuable object. But objects don't fight back. Objects don't have the power to bring down empires. He had underestimated her. And in the cold, sterile silence of his office, with the ruins of his desk around him, Alexander Caldwell finally realized that this was a battle he might not win. The predator was, for the first time in his life, starting to feel like the prey. The day of the deposition was gray and overcast, the sky over Manhattan the color of unpolished steel. It felt appropriate. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my new modest apartment, a two-bedroom rental on the Upper West Side secured by Anya's firm, and took a deep breath. The woman looking back at me was someone I was still getting to know. I was no longer wearing designer gowns. Today, my armor was a simple dark gray dress, professional and unassuming. My only piece of jewelry was a thin silver bracelet, a gift from my mother that I had kept hidden away during my marriage. The cut on my cheek had healed into a thin, pale scar, a faint silver crescent just below my eye. I had refused Anya's offer to have a makeup artist cover it. I wanted him to see it. I wanted the world to see it. My hand rested on the now prominent curve of my stomach. My son. He was my strength, my reason, my entire world. Today, I was fighting for him. Anya had prepped me for weeks. We had gone over every possible question, every psychological trick Alexander's lawyers would try to pull. They would call me a liar, a mentally unstable hysteric, a calculating gold digger who had staged the entire incident. They would try to provoke me, to make me cry, to make me angry. "Your greatest weapon is your calm," Anya had told me, her voice firm but kind. "You are not the hysterical woman they want to portray. You are a calm, credible, and composed mother-to-be who is telling the truth. Let your truth be the only thing that matters." The law firm where the deposition was being held was a temple of corporate power, all dark wood, polished brass, and hushed, intimidating silence. It was Alexander's territory. As we walked into the conference room, my heart hammered against my ribs. And there he was. He sat at the far end of a long, imposing mahogany table, flanked by a team of 3 lawyers who looked like they had been carved from granite. Alexander looked diminished. The swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, coiled energy. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He was a king in exile, and he radiated a bitter, impotent rage. His eyes met mine across the table. I saw a flicker of shock as he looked at me. He was expecting the timid, frightened Maria he had controlled for years. He wasn't prepared for the quiet strength in my gaze. His eyes darted to the scar on my cheek, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something that looked like shame before it was swallowed by anger. I took my seat opposite him, with Anya by my side. The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. A court stenographer sat at the end of the table, her fingers poised over her machine. A videographer adjusted a camera pointed directly at me. Alexander's lead attorney, a man named Marcus Thorne with a predatory smile, began the proceedings. "For the record, could you please state your full name?" "Maria May Caldwell," I said, my voice clear and steady. For the next 3 hours, Thorne tried to dismantle me, piece by piece. He brought up my family's financial troubles before my marriage, implying I had married Alexander for his money. He brought up a therapist I had seen briefly for anxiety, trying to paint me as mentally fragile. He twisted my words, interrupted my answers, and condescended to me with every question. "Mrs. Caldwell, isn't it true that you were prone to dramatic outbursts?" "No, that is not true." "Isn't it true that you were unhappy in your marriage and were looking for a way out, a way to secure a generous settlement?" "I was unhappy because my husband was abusive," I said calmly, looking directly at Alexander. "The only thing I want to secure is a safe future for my child." "Your husband, a celebrated philanthropist, a titan of industry, you expect this room to believe he would physically assault you?" "I don't just expect you to believe it," I replied, my voice unwavering. "The whole world has seen the proof." Thorne's smile faltered. He was losing control. I wasn't reacting as he had planned. I wasn't breaking. He changed tactics, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "The incident on the terrace. It was a terrible accident, wasn't it? Mr. Caldwell was gesturing, the glass was slippery, it simply flew from his hand." "No," I said. He looked me in the eye and he threw it at me. "You were arguing, weren't you? You provoked him, said things to upset him." I told him I was tired. That is what provoked him. The room was silent. Alexander, who had been staring down at the table, looked up, his jaw clenched. Anya chose that moment to intervene. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "My client has been very patient. Now we have a witness. We would like to call Ms. Isabella Rossi." A side door opened and Isabella walked in. If I had looked different, she was transformed. Gone were the designer clothes and the defiant attitude. She was dressed in a simple black suit, her hair pulled back, her face pale and serious. She looked terrified but resolute. Alexander's head snapped up. The color drained from his face. He stared at Isabella with a look of pure, venomous betrayal. This was a blow he had not anticipated. Isabella took her seat, and Anya began her questioning. "Ms. Rossi, were you present on the terrace with Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell on the night of the incident?" "Yes, I was." "Could you please describe what you saw?" Isabella took a shaky breath, her eyes fixed on Anya. "Alexander, Mr. Caldwell was angry with Maria. He was berating her. She was calm. He was not. He called her an embarrassment. Then he threw his champagne glass at her." "Did it slip?" Anya asked. "No," Isabella said, her voice gaining strength. "He threw it. It was deliberate. I saw it." Thorne objected, but the damage was done. Isabella went on to describe Alexander's controlling behavior, his explosive temper, the threats he had made to her after the video leaked. She provided text messages, emails. It was a systematic demolition of Alexander's character, delivered by the one person he thought he had under his control. As she spoke, I watched Alexander. The rage had collapsed into something else. Despair. He looked like a man watching his own kingdom burn to the ground. The machine had been completely dismantled, its gears and levers scattered across the floor. The final blow came when Anya presented her masterstroke. "Mr. Caldwell," Anya said, turning her attention to him, "we have a sworn affidavit from a Mr. David Chen, a former employee of your IT department. He has testified that for the past 5 years, you have had him install and maintain illegal surveillance software on all of your wife's electronic devices. He has provided us with logs of your activity. We also have a locksmith who is prepared to testify that the safe in your home office is not a standard model, but a custom-built vault, and he has the records of its installation." Anya slid a document across the table. "This is a motion we are filing with the court to have the safe opened. We believe it contains evidence of financial malfeasance, tax evasion, and other materials relevant to this case. Or you can agree to our settlement terms. The choice is yours." The room was deathly quiet. Alexander stared at the document as if it were a snake. His lawyers whispered frantically to him. He was trapped. Utterly and completely trapped. If that safe was opened, his financial empire, the one thing he had left, would be destroyed. His father's ghost would laugh. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine one last time. The anger was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the hollowed-out shell of a man. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod to his lawyer. It was over. I had won. But as I walked out of that building into the late afternoon sun, which had finally broken through the clouds, I didn't feel the elation I had expected. I felt a quiet, profound sense of release. It wasn't about victory or revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my story. The reckoning had come not with a shout, but with the quiet, unshakable power of the truth. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt free. 6 months later, I sat on a blanket in the middle of Sheep Meadow, the late spring sun warm on my face. The scent of freshly cut grass and hot pretzels filled the air. A few feet away, my son, Leo, slept peacefully in his stroller, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, gentle rhythm. He was 3 months old, and he was perfect. The world was no longer a stage or a prison. It was just the world, full of ordinary, beautiful things I was only now learning to appreciate. The sound of a dog barking, the laughter of children playing, the feeling of the sun on my skin. These were the riches I had been missing. The divorce had been finalized quickly and quietly. Faced with the evidence Anya had amassed, Alexander had capitulated completely. He had wanted to avoid a public trial at all costs. The settlement was substantial, more money than I could ever spend, but it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the freedom it represented. The penthouse, the jewelry, the cars, they were all sold. They were artifacts from another life, a life that no longer belonged to me. I had used a portion of the settlement to create the Maria Foundation. Our mission was simple: to provide discreet, comprehensive support for victims of domestic abuse in high-net-worth situations. We offered legal aid, financial counseling, security services, and trauma therapy, all the things I had so desperately needed. Anya sat on the board, and in a surprising turn of events, so did Isabella. Isabella had used her own settlement from Alexander to start a new life. She had moved to London and opened a small independent art gallery that championed emerging female artists. She and I were not friends, not in the traditional sense. The scars of our shared history were too deep for that, but we were allies, bound by a mutual respect and the shared understanding that we had survived the same storm. Her involvement with the foundation was her penance, and her way of ensuring no other woman was left as vulnerable as we had been. Alexander had disappeared from public life. His company had been restructured, his name scrubbed from the letterhead. I heard through Anya that he was living in self-imposed exile in a small, remote town in Switzerland, the one country that wouldn't extradite him for the financial crimes the contents of his safe had revealed. He had lost his empire, his reputation, his wife, and his son. He had sent one letter, passed through his lawyers, to mine. It was short. "I hope he never knows his father." I didn't know if it was an expression of remorse or a final bitter curse. Perhaps it was both. I folded the letter and put it away. Leo would know his story one day, but I would be the one to tell it to him. He would learn about strength, resilience, and the importance of kindness. He would not be raised in the shadow of his father's rage. A shadow fell over my blanket. I looked up to see Anya smiling, holding 2 cups of iced coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing one to me. She sat down on the blanket, looking at the sleeping baby. "He looks like you." "He has my eyes," I said, my heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "Thank God." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city buzz around us. "You did it, Maria," Anya said softly. "You built a new life, a better one." I looked at my son, at the peaceful park, at the friend sitting beside me. The scar on my cheek was barely visible now, a faint silvery line. I no longer tried to hide it. It was a part of my story, a reminder not of the wound, but of the healing. I was no longer Mrs. Alexander Caldwell, the millionaire's wife. I was Maria, Leo's mother, the founder of a charity, a survivor. My life was not defined by glittering parties or flawless diamonds, but by quiet moments, meaningful work, and the profound, unconditional love for my child. I was richer now than I had ever been. The story of Maria Caldwell is a stark reminder that the most lavish cages are still cages. Her journey from silent victim to a powerful voice for change shows the incredible strength of the human spirit. It wasn't just about a viral video. It was about the moment a woman decided her own life and the life of her child was worth more than any fortune. She found that true wealth isn't what you own, but what you can't lose. If Maria's story of courage and redemption moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Her story could be a beacon of hope for someone living in silence. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of survival and transformation. Thank you for watching.